As people get used to the new normal, can our behaviours and experiences over the past year help shape and improve how we live?
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Irish research continues to make advancements in human health and the health of the planet.
That's so amazing. This week on 10 Things to Know About, we're investigating kelp forest ecosystems and how seaweed could play a part in reducing methane emissions. From fish and crustaceans to sea mammals and seagrasses, Ireland boasts a magical underwater world. With over 3,000 kilometres of rocky shoreline, it's a perfect spot for seaweeds like kelp that prefer colder, nutrient-rich waters. Kelp forest ecosystems are teeming with life, home to hundreds of invertebrates, fish and other algae, and used as shelter from predators and storms.
We have over 500 native seaweed species between the shoreline and the deep sea zone. I'm at the beach to find out how these abundant and stunning seaweed forests could help in the fight against climate change.
Irish waters are actually very diverse for all seaweeds, so there's over 500 species found here. And this is just like a perfect temperature type of habitat for kelps. They really like rocky coastlines with moderate exposure. Too much wave action just tears them out, but somewhere like this, where we are right now in Carrow, perfect kind of habitat for them. When I first moved to Ireland, I was really interested in looking at species-specific interactions with kelp, with seaweeds in general, because they're so productive in terms of providing a food resource, providing oxygen for the ecosystem, and structuring habitats, that there must be some very intricate relationships with things like fish or invertebrates. But when I got here, I realized that we didn't really have a solid baseline or understanding of how diverse these habitats, how productive these habitats are. So initially, we were really just interested in describing the species-specific kind of associations with kelp, how they grow over the year, what the water chemistry is like.
So you just wanted to paint a picture of what is the kelp like, what's the world like for them down there, what other creatures live with them, and what's the symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Kate and her team studied sites around the coastline of Ireland, collecting samples to study the biodiversity, productivity and resilience of these kelp forests. The Kelp Res project examines the genetic diversity of kelp population. Seaweeds have characteristics, like eye colour in humans, that are coded in pairs of alleles. The more alleles per characteristic within a population, the more genetically diverse it is.
If we were to think about our phenotype, the way we look, eye color, hair color, something like that, we can tell the number of alleles within a population, how many individuals are homozygous, so they have the same allele, heterozygous have two different alleles, and so on. And that gives us an idea of how diverse that population is and the kind of mating system dynamics within.
By knowing how genetically diverse the population is, we can better understand whether our kelp forests will be able to withstand threats or changes in the environment.
In this part of the North Atlantic, we're really worried about an increase in the number of storms that you might see with climate change, because the storms really kind of come through, especially in the shallow parts of the systems, and tear up the kelp, and they end up on the beach here just as drift. And people are very concerned about ocean warming because a lot of these cold water species that we have in Ireland won't do better if the waters get warmer. So if we increase the water temperature 1.5, 2 degrees Celsius, different aspects of that life cycle might respond poorly to that warmer water. And we are seeing things like golden kelp here, which is a warmer water kelp that you find in Portugal, Morocco.
There's signs already.
There might be signs, you know. I hope that the results of our research are going to be able to inform different groups that might utilize or try and preserve these kelp ecosystems.
Because kelp is possibly a powerful tool for us in terms of climate action, isn't it?
Sure, yeah. So kelp is a photosynthetic organism, meaning it draws down carbon dioxide, which is a really big concern for us. So preserving kelp forests are being proposed as a way to help reduce your carbon footprint, maybe.
Kate is taking me snorkeling to show me the biodiversity that thrives in the kelp forest ecosystem.
We got all these crabs. There's loads of different juvenile gadoids, so our cods, our pollocks, kind of in the kelp canopy there, maybe hiding from visual predators. It's home to so many different critters. Year-round, I think we're seeing over 313 species within this system, from winter to summer. So it's a really special place.
How beautiful is that? That was amazing, Kate.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. I can't believe everything we saw. The amount of work that must go into just unpicking all those different things. Like, it's so painstaking.
A lot of time underwater. I just hope that we've kind of created a baseline for kelp forests in Ireland. I just really hope that that fosters new research projects, conservation of these habitats. So I'm really hoping that kelp forest ecology kind of really booms in Ireland in the future.
This is only the beginning of it.
That's right.
Completing site surveys of the entire coast isn't feasible as they cost a lot of time and money. Aaron Golden has been using a bird's eye view to survey this underwater habitat.
Earth observation satellites have been orbiting the planet for nearly 30, 40 years, and they take amazing quality data. The issue we face, of course, is that these satellites only pass overhead a few times a month. And as you know, in Ireland, a clear day, you're buying lottery tickets. There's been a total revolution in the area of remote sensing where people have essentially minimized the cost level of actually building a satellite and putting it to orbit by going from something the size of an SUV to something the size of a cereal box. And you can take something the size of a cereal box, you can put a telephoto lens in there, you can put all the imaging equipment, radio receiver, solar panels, and you can launch hundreds of them. What that means, if you've got multiple mini Earth observation satellites passing overhead at any one time, the chances are they're going to get a clear shot.
Another issue has been the poor image resolution of traditional satellite systems. But these smaller and cheaper CubeSats have remarkable resolution of just 3 meters, making them ideal for this project.
As you can see straight away, the image fidelity and the resolution that's available to us using these wonderful little CubeSats allows us the possibility to actually use Earth observation data to try to figure out what we can see under the water off the Irish coastline. It sounds like a crazy thing. How do you see something underwater? Well, the remarkable thing is it's possible to see down to about 10 meters, and that actually covers quite a significant amount of the Irish coastline. What we can do is we can study the reflected light off the sea bottom, off the sea floor, and distinguish that reflected light that comes from sand, rocks, and what comes from macroalgae, and in particular from kelp. When we take these images and we use AI software and a few other techniques, image processing techniques, to identify the regions, what we're doing is we're essentially building a map, a 2D map. This is a picture taken from the drone of the dive site. You can see the kelp beds and so on and so forth. Here we have the same region as visible from one of these CubeSats, and overlaid on top of that is what the artificial intelligence software decided is what has the signature of kelp. I've highlighted in yellow where the actual view would be if you were looking from the drone perspective. And there's a phenomenally good overlap between what you and I can see looking at the actual drone shot, certainly close into the coast, and what we actually see here on the image that was taken from space. And the important thing is that that was identified automatically by the software. And so you can sort of see the potential of using this technology to survey for the kelp forests and the kelp beds that are off the Irish coast.
Having mapped the location of the kelp forest, Aaron is working on methods of determining how much kelp there is.
So recently we've been working with the National Parks and Wildlife Service. They have a team there that have been surveying sites, and they've been using sonar. You can use sonar to study for want of a better word, the crinkliness of the seabed. And you can correlate the level of crinkliness that corresponds to the leaves, the blades of the actual kelp itself, with the amount of kelp that's actually there. So using sonar, you get a very good sense of the quantity of the kelp there, and so as a consequence, you have a very good sense of the mass, of the biomass that's actually under the surface.
The site in Carrow was a test case, and Aaron hopes to continue this work around the coast. Mapping the location and biomass of the kelp forest means the effects of climate change and harvesting can be monitored over time.
Nobody has ever done this before for kelp around the Irish coast. It seems bizarre, but it seems like we have only, as a nation, only just recently discovered the oceans around our shoreline. I think it's fantastic that there's this interest in what we have out there. I just hope it turns into something that is really meaningful.
The year is 1811, and Europe is at war. Napoleon is at the peak of his powers, much of continental Europe lies under French control, and across the Channel, Britain and France eyeball each other, as both impose naval blockades in a bid to grind down the other. The blockades work. The French run short of the raw materials needed for making gunpowder, and desperate for explosives to keep their war machine fed, the French turn to their scientists, their beaches, and their seaweed to power their cannons. Toiling at his lab bench, chemist Bernard Courtois is extracting some of the key ingredients in gunpowder, soda salts, from the ashes of burnt kelp seaweed. Tired from a long day making munitions, he mistakenly adds too much sulfuric acid to a container laden with seaweed ash. A strange violet vapor silently rises from the ashes, bathing the room in a soft purple haze. Peering through the plum-coloured fumes, he is looking at something never seen before. The world's newest element, iodine. Found in trace amounts in seawater and in abundance in seaweed, Courtois' accidental uncovering of elemental iodine would go on to become essential in modern medicine and antiseptics. From explosive beginnings on the beaches of France, iodine's discovery is a classic case of seaweed-based scientific serendipity. See you next time.
An Australian study has found that if just 2% of a ruminant's diet is made up of seaweed, it can reduce methane output by a whopping 95%. Unfortunately, the seaweed in question is a tropical seaweed, so it's not found in Irish waters, and the active compound is carcinogenic. I'm meeting Maria Hayes to find out if Irish researchers can take anything from that study and implement it here.
There are caveats with that study, but it was the foundation, I suppose, for our Sea Solutions project. Sea Solutions is a project committed to exploring seaweed and seaweed molecules and their potential to reduce methane from cows, cattle, and sheep. We're hoping to reduce methane emissions in the region of between 10 and 40%.
There must be hundreds of species of seaweed in Ireland. How do you go about finding the right one that has all the properties you're looking for?
We have about 600 species of seaweed or macroalgae along the west coast of Ireland. So far, we've screened about 50 of these seaweeds.
The team is examining a range of compounds, including fluorotannins, which are unique to brown seaweeds.
We carry out an extraction process using different solvents or liquids until we get to pure tannin, and then we screen it in our antimicrobial assays using the methane-producing bacteria.
So the bacteria in the gut of these cattle are interacting with the food and creating this methane.
Exactly, yeah. So there's an enzyme involved in that process. It's called methyl coenzyme reductase.
I know it well.
Yeah, you probably do. But basically, this enzyme is what we want to inhibit.
Once the first part of testing is completed, the seaweeds and seaweed extracts that have shown promise are brought here to the Animal and Grassland Centre at Grange for further testing before animal trials.
David Kenny is head of the Animal and Bioscience Department at Teagasc and has been telling me about the research they've been conducting on seaweed.
Do you see seaweed being fed to ruminants as part of their diet?
Conservative estimates, if you were to feed all the animals, the 78 million animals in Ireland, seaweed, every day of the year, essentially, even at a very, very low level, at about 1% of their diet, you'd probably need, we'll say, about 1 million tonnes of seaweed per year, and we're a long, long way away from that kind of level of production. So it is something that will need an awful lot more, I suppose, investigation from a sustainability point of view as well as its efficacy.
In order to test how well any seaweed or seaweed extract works, the active compounds that Maria has selected have been added to feed supplements for further trials.
We run the Russitech experiment, where we have an artificial rumen or cow stomach, essentially. And what we do there is we test a lot of different potential supplements. And then we look at the most, I suppose, useful or promising candidates. And we, I suppose, scale that up, we'll say, to firstly a sheep experiment. And then from that, we'll screen them further. And eventually we'll pick out maybe the top 2 or 3 potential supplements and feed them to cattle. Because as you can imagine, I suppose the level of expense increases as you go, we'll say, from the artificial in vitro system, as we call it, the Russitech, to the sheep, to the animals, to the beef cattle.
The Russitech is an in vitro simulation of a sheep or cow's rumen. For these experiments, Stuart Kieran has used rumen samples from cattle.
Cows are, people often say they have 4 stomachs. The rumen is the largest one of those 4 stomachs. Essentially in this machine, what we have here is we have 8 different vessels. So each vessel is just really simulating that rumen, that first stomach that I talked about. What we're essentially doing on day 1 is we're inoculating this system with the bacterial population that's found inside in the live animal.
So would that be comparable to, we hear a lot about our own gut biome. So you've basically taken that out of the cow and put it in here to make sure it's as similar to the cow's stomach as possible.
Inside it, there's a smaller internal vessel where we put feed in and we change that feed every day. You have the water bath, maintaining those vessels at 39 degrees. So that's what the rumen functions at, is 39 degrees. The artificial saliva is being infused there at a constant rate. And then this vertical agitation as well. So the rumen contracts every 30, 40 seconds in the live animal, and that's just really just to mix all the feed.
Can I ask you then, is there a way of finding out that if an animal is eating seaweed, there's less methane produced?
Yeah, so we have gas bags underneath as well. So we would measure that against a control where there'd be no treatment. So ideally, if something has potential to reduce methane production, the control treatment would obviously have a higher level. So we can measure that on a daily basis. Because there's such a large amount of their energy, like up to 80% and maybe 70 to 80% as well of their protein requirements are manufactured in that rumen. If we can simulate that in a lab, it gives us an ideal opportunity to screen different feed additives or different compounds to see whether they're going to have a negative effect. We know then not to bring it forward to the live animal.
Seaweed supplements that showed methane-reducing properties and didn't have a negative effect on digestibility were brought forward for a sheep trial in Athenry. The 16-week trial is in its final week.
We're looking at feed intake, feed efficiency, and we're also monitoring the animals closely to ensure that the feed supplements have no effect on the animal's health or welfare during that period. We test for the methane emissions in a piece of equipment called the portable accumulation chambers. We use a portable gas analyzer probe within the chamber to measure methane, oxygen and carbon dioxide at time 0, after 25 minutes and after 50 minutes. And then we can actually then compare the methane emissions levels from animals that are fed the diets supplemented with the seaweed extracts, and indeed our controls. From this particular trial, we have collected rumen samples during the trial on 3 occasions. And these are going to be analysed in the laboratory. So essentially, we're going to isolate microbial DNA and RNA and carry out next generation sequencing so that we can assess if the seaweeds or seaweed extracts had any effect on the rumen microbes. There's about 1 week left in the trial. The sheep are thriving. They're all eating the seaweed and seaweed extract. They're gaining weight. We've seen no ill effects of the seaweeds or seaweed extracts on the sheep. After we've all our measurements in place, we'll analyse the data and see how the results look. And hopefully we'll see reductions in methane emissions. Also, we're going to collect some meat samples from these sheep. And we're going to see if the seaweeds or seaweed extracts had any negative effects on the meat quality, sensory, and also to see if there's any residues and serve as no negative effects on consumer safety.
Following the results of the sheep trial, any successful feed additives will be brought forward for a cattle trial in the spring. David will be overseeing this trial and hopes they can develop a feed supplement for ruminants.
How feasible is it for a farmer to give their cattle a supplement like this maybe every day?
Indoors even, it's much more practical, obviously. While they're out grazing, where the vast majority of cattle spend most of their life, it's obviously much more difficult, particularly beef animals like these that aren't, being milked or brought into the parlour to receive supplement. So one of the things that we're very interested in is looking at the feasibility of maybe identifying particular biochemicals that are active in reducing methane emissions and maybe incorporating those into a bolus. So the bolus will be administered to the animal maybe at the start of the grazing season, and if, I suppose, that particular biochemical will be released slowly throughout the year, that obviously will make it much more practical to deliver it. And it will be effective throughout the year as opposed to certain periods of the year when the animal is inside.
This is such a huge project, Maria. What are your hopes for it?
Yeah, it's a huge project and it's very exciting and of its time. So we're really hoping that we can impact positively on greenhouse gas emissions, help to maintain jobs in Irish agriculture and continue to help produce beef and dairy here in a sustainable manner from pasture-based systems.
That's our 10 things to know about seaweed. Next week, we explore how climate change is affecting our coasts.
Came too late to protect this house.